knowledge is carnage? Yes, I think my life would have been a lot better without knowing about these books. Alright, let's go. Hello everyone and welcome to my channel, to MJ Books. This is your new go-to spot for book reviews, book recommendations and the occasional rant, which is happening today. And welcome to my February review, in which I'm going to talk about The Atlas 6 and why essentially it put me into a reading slump instead of getting me out of one. So if you want to hear my rant about these books and what I thought of them, please stay tuned. I have my notes ready, so let's dive right in. Right, so before I get into all the reasons I did not finish this book, I want to talk a little bit about, set the stage. So the Atlas 6 series is a trilogy written by Olivia Blake, and I read the first two. So this is a trilogy, a dark academia fantasy trilogy that has been all over Book Talk, BookTube, and is basically on everyone's fantasy recommendation list. And my cousin actually recommended this series to me. I read a lot of fantasy. Think Priory of the Orange Tree, The Bone Season, of course, Sarah J. Maas, Six of Crows, Darker Shade of Magic, etc. So I'm actually also always looking for new takes on the fantasy genre, and unfortunately, this one wasn't it. What is the Atlas 6 about? Basically, it's about the Alexandrian Society, which is a secret group that safeguards all the knowledge from the Alexandrian Library when it burned down, and every 10 years they recruit 6 new of the most powerful magical academicians in the world. And these 6 are Nico and Libby, which are basically each other's nemesis and have very control over physics-based magic. Then there's Parisa, which is sort of like a mind reader, who's good at seduction. There's Rena, who has a very deep connection with nature. She can make things grow. There's Callum, who's like an empath, an illusionist type person who can change your emotions. And then there's Tristan, who can, basically his magical ability is sort of like a mystery in the at the start of the book, and we're gonna explore that further. Then there's Atlas. This is the enigmatic recruiter and caretaker of the society, who sort of recruits these 6 every 10 years, and these 6 have to spend a year trying to prove themselves worthy to the library, giving them some research typical for their magical abilities, and then 5 of them will be initiated after that year. 1 will have to be eliminated. Dun dun dun. There we are. So, this sounds intriguing, right? I thought the same, but this is where it all went wrong for me. So, nothing really happens in this book, and to be honest, that's my biggest problem with it. There's very little plot development that goes, fast enough to be motivated to read. Instead, we get a lot of internal monologues and endless descriptions of superfluous details that don't really matter. And events are skipped over at some point. There was 2 weeks that's, skipped over in a page. I think that's a pretty huge flag for a fantasy book, and for the author should be like, wait a minute, maybe something's wrong with my plot structure. Also, the plot twist at the end of the first book, it's not really a spoiler, almost every fantasy book has a plot twist, but this one was very sudden and overwhelming. I was not as shocked, I was more confused with the plot twist. It sort of wasn't very clearly or even foreshadowed. It just didn't feel earned. And when I reached the second book, my cousin promised me it would have more depth to it, which it had for the first quarter, so I was pretty happy with that. But then it sort of fell flat again. Also, there's too many POVs. This book has 6 characters, and at some point there's even 8 perspectives. And don't get me wrong, I absolutely love multiple POVs of different characters, but when it's overdone, it can be very overwhelming in this way. For example, in the Six of Crows, where is it? Here. In the Six of Crows, there's also 6 characters, and each also has their own POV. How Six of Crows does it is just very well developed in terms of personal connections between the characters, and because of the story in the Atlas 6, because they're all different people, they don't know each other yet, coming from different places of the earth, there is no real connection between them, and I feel like this many POV sort of prevents that connection between the characters to happen, and also for me as a reader to feel empathetic towards them. Because there's so many POVs, we stay on the surface. So in this way, I feel like the characters don't really get enough room to breathe and to explore themselves. And as a reader as well, I just don't really get to know them that well. Also, they're written in the third person. And I feel like if it would have been in the first person, Olivia Blake could have made more distinctive voices for each character and to also understand them better, because sometimes I just didn't really understand where they were coming from, what their motivations were, what their emotional stakes were. So this goes together with an underdeveloped magic system and world, and for me a fantasy book needs a good, secure world building. It doesn't have to be very elaborate, but at least it has to feel like the author knows what they're talking about. So the magic system in this book is supposedly based on scientific facts, like it could actually maybe happen, but we don't get much more information about that and why that is and how that is. So we barely learn how this magic works and what its limits are. And for a book so descriptive, it gives us very little detail about the actual system that would make us more invested in the story itself. The world doesn't really feel secure. It feels like we as a reader get to know the world alongside Olivia Blake as she's writing it. For example, in the Bone season, which I have right here, also one of my favorite series, Samantha Shannon, the author, for her world building, it really feels as if she knows what she's writing about, as if she knows more than we do. And she doesn't reveal a lot about the world at the first place, but it just, as a reader, sort of get this unconscious feeling of, like, okay, she knows what she's talking about. And for the Atlas 6, I just did not really have that, which made it feel very unstable. Also, there's no strong antagonist in this book. I think it would have been salvaged by a greater, morally gray enemy. There was one character in the second book that might have been developed into that, but it just stayed very vague. The threat wasn't really as explicit as I think this book might have needed to sort of raise the stakes, to make clear that why is happening what is happening. So again, in the Bone season, there's a similar kind of character, like the anti-hero, antagonist type character with a second agenda. In the Bone season, this creates a very good tension, but in the Atlas 6, we just never get to that level of intrigue. We never get to know more about this character or more about their motivations. So, by the second book, I was asking myself, what is the goal of it all? And I feel like Olivia Blake really tried to figure it out as she went along. And also in the second book, they have to sort of save the world from, I'm not going to spoil, from something, but it's never really made clear why, besides the obvious, why or how they want to, or each personal motivations to save this world or against who. So these stakes are just never really clear. And I think that's why this book disappointed me the most. Mostly in the second book, I don't know about the third one, but it feels like Olivia Blake tried to put some moral story, moral message about like knowledge and power into this, but it felt very much hidden and just lost in very abstract and philosophical dialogue. So it just got lost somewhere on some astral plane, I don't know, 10 universes away. So these are all the reasons I did not pick up the third book to finish this series. And I actually feel bad because I feel like these characters are also very interesting and I love the world, how it's set up, like the Alexandrian library actually burned down. And this is like a what if situation. What if that knowledge was all saved? And what if we live in a world where magic is actually a thing? So these characters in this world just had so much potential, but because it just let down in certain areas, I think that a fantasy book can be really good in. It just let me down and disappointed me. It just didn't push me forward to read more. If you've read book 3, please let me know if it gets better and if I should maybe give it another chance. Also let me know what your thoughts are of the first 2 books, or if you want to read them. So I would love to read your thoughts. And I also want to thank you for listening to my rant, to listening to why I did not really like these books. This was my February review, and I hope to see you in the next one, which is going to be my March review. Thank you for watching. Bye!